All right. We're live once again. A few days off, but we're back. We're back. Saturday night, and we're jumping into a little bit of reading today in the book of Obadiah. And it's one of those fascinating things about my story and my journey as I move forward in life. It's very clear to me about the grace given to me and the grace that's been given to me in the sense of understanding your own gifts. If you look at Romans chapter 12 or even 1 Peter chapter 4, we see that call to whatever gift you have received to use it to serve others. And it's clear that I understand that I have that gift. I'm grateful for that gift. And it's a responsibility that each person has to use the gift that they have received to serve others. So I say all of that because sometimes when I'm reading on my own and I'm learning on my own and I get excited and pumped up about the possibility of sharing what I've learned with other people. So some of you who've been on the journey with me know that a couple of years back we started doing this church thing on the south side of San Antonio, and I was getting a chance to preach there, or sometimes every week, sometimes a couple of times a week, sometimes once every other week. And I mention all of that because sometimes I could read something and get excited about when I'm going to be able to share it with other people. And sometimes I'd read it and I say, you know what, maybe I'm going to save this for that next message or the next sermon. Well, what happened late or kind of middle of last year is they went to go do the foundation work on the building that we were meeting at. So the foundation turned into some of the flooring work, and the flooring work turned into multiple projects, and ultimately it led to a massive delay with the flooring of the church building we were meeting in, and then us being there. So we haven't been back for months in months. And I think last service was probably like in either August or July. All of that to say is there's a scripture maybe we could even start off with just right here, even in our introduction. It's from the book of Jeremiah chapter 20, and we'll get a chance to look at that verse here together. And let's take a look at that. And ultimately, what this one is going to give us, here we go, it's verse 9. It says, "But if I say I will not mention his word or speak any more in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I am weary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot." So what we see in this passage is this idea that you're like, man, I just don't want to be somebody who holds the word in. I want to be somebody who shares it. And somebody like me, it might be simple to you all, but sometimes it's like, well, bro, like you have a broadcast station, you have a studio right in the house, and you spent significant money investing in a studio setup so that you could have a broadcast station to be able to project and send you the message out to anybody who would ever tune in. And I think there's a worry in the background for me. And it goes, I've learned a few things that I'm looking forward to sharing for the rest of my life and with the rest of my life, is spending time in sharing what I've learned. And the worry is, like, will I be able to share what I've learned? Will I have enough time? Right. And there's a concept that goes like, you can't put an old man's head on a young man's shoulders. And there's an element where it seems like they almost have to go through the hard times to experience things. But as far as it depends on me, I wanted to be able to share as much as I could in the time that I have, especially the insights from things that have transformed and changed my life, which is the Bible. So if you looked at the scriptures and you're able to see that there's 1,189 chapters of the Bible. And so even if I only taught from one chapter every single day for a full year, and then for 3 consecutive years, even if I never missed a day and I went live went live like this and taught from one chapter a day, it would still, even in 3 years at 365 days each, it would be 1,095 chapters. So in other words, there still would have been, what's that difference? Whatever. What is that? 96 chapters left. So maybe this is a journey. Maybe it's a 10-year journey. But as we jump into the book of Obadiah today, I think there's going to be a lesson in there for us that's timeless. And especially as some of us who keep our ear to culture, we'll be able to look at a few insights about even how it applies to even a Ja Morant situation in the NBA. You know, he has a problematic situation that came up over the last couple of weeks. And I think there's insights that if he had a study like this, if he had somebody in his circle who was breaking down the scriptures and then giving him the word and helping him to live it out, maybe he would have made different decisions that wouldn't have costed. And it's probably going to be millions of dollars at stake with the mistake he made over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks here. So all of that to say, we also see this story that came out that I came across. It was from Jenna Ortega, who played Wednesday in the Netflix show, and we saw her approach. She kind of pulled back some of the layers and kind of showed us into the background of Wednesday, and we see some of her approach, and I'm wondering how it's going to age. Not just her approach, but even her going on and speaking openly about her really pushing back against the writers and the film team, I'm curious to see how that's going to unfold over these next few years. But all of that to say, let's pull up the book of Obadiah. It's only one chapter, and if as far as it depends on me, my goal and my focus is that as we go into this together, the hope is we'll go through the scriptures, but we won't do it like Genesis to Revelation. Instead, we'll do it where we go through the 1 chapter books of the Bible. So there's 5 1 chapter books. So for the first 5 days, it'll be, Obadiah, 2nd John, 3rd John, Jude, and Philemon, right? So those would be the first 5. And then the next 2, there's only 1 2 chapter book, which is the book of Haggai. Then there's 7 3 chapter books and 6 4 chapter books and 5 5 chapter books and so on. So we'll just go through it with the smallest books of the Bible first, and then work our way through. And naturally, the way I approach teaching, I try to have it a very down to earth. It's almost like, because I've been in settings teaching the word of God in prison settings or even in jail settings. And there's times where it's not like people have access to the internet to do a bunch of thorough study. But my passion for years has been like, if you just had the book yourself, if you just had picked up the book, you picked up the scriptures, what insights would you come to? What decisions would you make in your life? What applications would be best to be inserted? Regardless if you're reading Old Testament, New Testament, what are the universal insights about your character that are at play? So let's go ahead and pull up the book of Obadiah. We'll start our 10-year journey through the 1,189 chapters of the Bible. We'll start it right here in the book of Obadiah. So we'll read through the chapter, and then I'll pull out, something that I'll also do as we go through this is I'll pull out maybe the key memory verse or memory verses that I would focus on in a text like this. So let's start it here in verse 1. It tells us, The vision of Obadiah. This is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. We have heard a message from the Lord. An envoy was sent to the nations to say, rise, let us go against her for battle. See, I will make you small among the nations. You will be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rocks and make your home on the heights, you who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. If thieves came to you, if robbers in the night, oh, what a disaster awaits you. Would they not steal only as much as they wanted? If grape pickers came to you, would they not leave a few grapes? But how Esau will be ransacked, his hidden treasures pillaged. All your allies will force you to the border. Your friends will deceive and overpower you. Those who eat your bread will set a trap for you, but you will not detect it. In that day, declares the Lord, will I not destroy the wise men of Edom, those of understanding in the mountains of Esau? Your warriors, Haman, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down in the slaughter. Because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. On the day you stood aloof while strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. You should not gloat over your brother in the day of his misfortune, nor rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor boast so much in the day of their trouble. You should not march through the gates of my people in the day of their disaster, nor gloat over them in their calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over their survivors in the day of their trouble. The day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. Just as you drank on my holy hill, so all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and be as if they had never been. But on Mount Zion will be deliverance, it will be holy, and Jacob will possess his inheritance. Jacob will be a fire and Joseph a flame. Esau will be stubble, and they will set him on fire and destroy him. There will be no survivors from Esau. The Lord has spoken. People from the Negev will occupy the mountains of Esau, and people from the foothills will possess the land of the Philistines. They will occupy the fields of Ephraim and Samaria, and Benjamin will possess Gilead. The company of Israelite exiles who are in Canaan will possess the land as far as Zarephath. The exiles from Jerusalem who are in Sepharad will possess the towns of the Negev. Deliverers will go up on Mount Zion to govern the mountains of Esau, and the Lord and the kingdom will be the Lord's. So as we go through a text like this, I mean, there's a number of things going on. And again, my role, if you're looking for the historical breakdown, I think that's another scholar's role, another book's role, another teacher's role. That's really not what I'm going to be on. But what I'm going to be focused on is, as we look at a text like this and some of the character implications that apply for us for all time. This is the Old Testament. There's a number of destruction, calamity, and results of sin that was taking place. But the character trait that we see early on in the chapter is what I want us to focus on and glean some insight and make some decisions and make it even a self-assessment from. And that comes from verse 3 and verse 4. So verse 3 and verse 4, what they tell us right here is the pride. Actually, let's go 2, 3, and 4. See, I will make you small among the nations. You will be utterly despised. And it says, the pride of your heart has deceived you. And so there's this calling about pride. And those people who've read the Old Testament and New Testament, you've read the scriptures, you read the Bible, then this theme is truly layered throughout the scriptures. This is the problem of pride. It's layered throughout the scriptures. And when I'm going to pull up a few characters and we'll be able to see what that pride looks like when it's manifested. Not just the consequence, but when you see somebody's thought process, see the way somebody with pride speaks, you see how they carry themselves, you see what they focus on, and you will be able to take a few lessons to see if there's pride in our life that is best to be rooted out. And so as we go through this together, again, the goal is for you to assess that, because it says the pride of your heart has deceived you. And whenever we're thinking about a self-assessment from life, I'm going to pull up this on the screen so you're able to see this. This one gives us this perspective. I create visuals from time to time about like what life is. And when it comes to somebody wants to make applications to their life as they're going through the scriptures or they're going through another personal development book, then really there's decisions we can make about our thinking, that's our thoughts, our words, that's our speech, our deeds, that's our actions, our response, that's when something happens in our lives, how we react to whether good times, bad times, and of course, the thing that holds it all together is those deep-rooted beliefs. So if we were to just quickly contrast beliefs from thoughts just for a moment, it might be like where as a kid you kind of learn, you might learn the principle of gravity. When you drop a fork, it falls to the ground, or when you drop a pen, it falls to the ground, or you turn the water on, you see it flow downward. And then even as a kid, you begin to learn some of the exceptions to this belief of gravity. Then you might see a balloon for the first time, and you realize, okay, there's a typical ways that the world works, and then there are also exceptions. So you have these beliefs built in that you don't have to decide all along, but you have these beliefs built in. So as we work through assessing ourselves with the potential pride in our lives, you might think through it from a thoughts, words, deeds, response, and beliefs perspective. Like, what thoughts of mine coincide with pride? What words of mine have pride? Which deeds of mine have pride? Which ways that I respond to life and I respond to people have pride? You know, I was having this conversation with a friend, and we, it's so beautiful when you're able to have solid discipling relationships where people are in your world aiming to sharpen you and lovingly disagree with you and push back and challenge you to be your best for God and for the people around you. And I remember I was in a conversation this past week, and we were discussing this idea. One of my friends, he asked me if I see these character problems in his life, and I shared with him. I said, I'll just be upfront with you. I don't see that character flaw that you're describing to me. I don't see it, but also, like, to be clear, when we're together, you and I are probably not triggering each other, right? Like, and when I'm with you, at least what I'm thinking is, how do I build this brother up? How do I listen? How do I ask questions? How do I consider him? How do I have you, right? So I may not be somebody who's triggering you. And the truth is, he doesn't trigger me either. So we have this safe space of maturity, of character that's built upon scriptures of the Bible. And so what I shared with him ultimately, which was true for me, it's not really a fair assessment if he were to just assess what my perspective is, because really, we aim to be well behaved when we're around each other. So many people, you got to think more so about your family or your friends, or for those who are married, hey, how are you around your spouse? Those of you who have kids, how are you around your kids? Those are some of the greatest sources of temptation of annoyance, the temptation of impatience, the temptation of rudeness, the temptation of harshness. That's when some of those things pop off. So it's not a great assessment to get with somebody, again, who fosters, again, your best behavior, but somebody who potentially doesn't. That's why I put on the screen here responses. So your response when people annoy you. Is there pride in your responses when people annoy you? Or is there pride in your response when people bother you? Or when people offend you? Or when people disagree with you? Or people choose a path that you wouldn't have chosen for them? That's where the assessment comes in. And that's why the response is relevant. Our normal thoughts, words, and deeds are one way, but then all of a sudden somebody throws a wrench in our plans, and all of a sudden then you see this other type of character come out. So sometimes people will ask, okay, well, how do you know? Like, what is that pride in your heart? Because the pride that's what the passage does tell us, right? It says the pride of your heart has deceived you. And then we get God's word telling us that just because you're high, you're soaring like the eagle, you're making your nest among the stars, just because you're soaring, just because you're shining, God can bring somebody like that down too. You know, I'm always fascinated when a character comes up in culture, and you look at Andrew Tate type character, and when they have, when they have boastful or prideful or elements where they exalt themselves over people and among others. I'm not saying there's not any value, and I'm not saying that there wasn't anything problematic with somebody like him. But what I am saying is when somebody has a nature about them, when they continue to exalt themselves, I often start this internal countdown, a little countdown. I'm going, all right, so how long will it be before that moment comes and they're brought down and they're humbled? Because the scripture does tell us that those who exalt themselves will be humbled, but the humble will be exalted. So if we have that promise in our we'll see that passage, and if we have that promise and that principle in mind, and we have a potential for our pride to deceive us, what I'm hoping to do, at least for this time, is where you're able to make that self-assessment. So let's look at a few characters from the scriptures that exhibited some of this pride. And then so we'll use Obadiah as a launching pad to speak about pride, and then a little bit of a character type study on some of the characters we'll see in the scriptures who exhibited this kind of problematic behavior and problematic manifestation of the pride on the inside. So if we went to the book of Esther, we'll start there and we'll look at the story of Haman, which some people have calculated and they suspect that this brother right here was like a billionaire of his time, and the amount of money he was donating and giving throughout the story. We're not going to go into all the stories, all the details of this story, but we are going to focus on some of the character that he exhibits in chapter 3, and then we'll see also in chapter 6 will be relevant for us. So let's get that pulled up, and we'll look through. Here we go. All right, chapter 3, verse 1. It says, after these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. So the brother is getting some shine over here, He's getting that recognition, that elevation. Verse 2 tells us all the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid him. I mean, this brother has people kneeling down and giving him honor. So he's in this good situation. It says, for the king had commanded this concerning him, but Mordecai, so one guy would not kneel down or pay him honor. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? And then it says, verse 4, day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore, they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people. You already see the problematic nature right here throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. So this man, Haman, noticed you have all of this honor, all of this recognition, all of this praise, people kneeling to you. And you have one guy who doesn't. One guy who chooses, nah. Not me. And then so Haman, instead of seeing all the recognition that he's receiving, instead of processing that and having the gratitude for the honor that's before him, instead there is a rage, there's an anger. Again, so what you might be picking up already is the word pride is not in this text. But you see it manifested in his anger about one person who's not following the direction, who's not giving him the honor. He's getting all worked up about the one person. One person is getting them all. Again, we talked about response, like based not just on your words when things are good, and your thoughts when things are good, not just on your deeds when things are good, but the way you respond to difficulty, to challenge, when the variables are not going as you prefer, how you respond in those settings reveals that character, reveals that pride or that humility. In Haman, we see the pride. We see the arrogance. We see the violence. We see the anger. And you often get that anger connected with pride. You often do. Let's see another window into Haman's life in chapter 6 of the same book. Again, we're not going to read the whole book. We'll eventually get to Esther's book and we'll go through it verse by verse and section by section. But for now, we'll get a chance to look in chapter 6 of Esther to see another incident of the pride in Haman's life. In chapter 6, let me pull that up so you can see it as well. It says, that night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. So he's realizing that Mordecai had saved him previously. So verse 3 tells us, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, the attendants answered. The king said, who is in the court? Now Haman, again, Haman's the character study that we're looking at right now. Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai to the pole he had set up for him. So you see this, again, this visual. That Haman wanted to impale Mordecai on the pole. Wanted to kill this dude. Verse 5, his attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman answered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man who the king delights to honor? So the king is asking Haman, like, I'm going to honor somebody. What do you think it's best that I do? You know, you almost just see Haman, rubbing his hands together, and he goes, Now Haman thought to himself, again, this is just a thought process. It's just this thought process to this circumstance and situation that's before him. Who is there that the king would rather honor than me. So even in his thought life, there is this element where he puts himself above all other people. Verse 7 tells us, so he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. So he has this whole vision of the kind of outfit he would have, of the circumstance and situation that he'd be honored, but being riding through the streets with the horse that he's riding. I mean, you just have this whole fantasy that he's doing, that he's honored in front of all these people. Verse 10 tells us, go at once, the king commanded Haman, get the robe, the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So I bring up this story. You can read the whole thing in its context to see the whole thing. I bring up this story because even we see Haman's thought life and the pride and this fantasy about how people would honor him and adore him and praise him, and it was the clothes he was wearing, it was the horse he was riding, all of this. Again, you see this whole makeup, and then we just go, okay, so when it comes to our own thought processes, we see this chapter 3, when people don't align with the behavior that we think is best, how do we respond? Is it that same anger, some of the hatred? Is it some of that bitterness? And then when it comes to, being we can hype ourselves up in our own mind, and it's unhealthy. It's not where we're supposed to be. So we see these a few characters. So we're going to keep on going through, and we'll see another character in the book of Daniel. It's going to be Daniel chapter 4. We're going to see a little bit of thought and language used by Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel. And we're going to see, and then we're going to connect all of this with a few trends we're seeing. So Daniel chapter 4, confidence, verse 30. Yes, we are. Let's go there and put it up on the screen so you can see it. Okay. So we're going to pick it up in verse 29. It says, 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? And so we just get it's a small glimpse. It's just a small glimpse. We see this, man, like, there's a whole lot of you in there. What you've built for your power, for your glory, for your majesty. Hold on. So we see what you've built for your power, for your glory, for your majesty. Okay, so there's a lot of you. There's a whole lot of you. So we see that in Nebuchadnezzar. Let's look at King Saul. He shows us another case study. We'll go to 1 Samuel chapter 18 and see this is after David had success with the Philistines and he was coming back, and we see this detail come out. So let's go to look at that text. 1 Samuel chapter 18. It says, verse 6 tells us, when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, this is like after the David and Goliath event that took place in chapter 17. It says, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. So They come out, in this story, it kind of shows us that Saul was lifted up. He was a subject in the songs. They talked about his victories, that he had slain thousands. Yet there was another detail in there, and it mentioned, but David has tens of thousands. And you see this analysis take place in verse 8. Saul was very angry. Again, we see this connected often with pride. This refrain displeased him greatly. Now again, he's assessing. He's focusing in on the details. They've credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. And you just see this analysis, and I've seen this in my own life, and as somebody who grew up playing sports, there's so much comparison. There's so much competition. There's so much scoreboard watching. Looking at the scoreboard, who's ahead? Looking at the stat sheet, who scored more points? Who grabbed more rebounds? Who has more assists? And Saul had his eyes on the scoreboard while his character was rotting. He's like 1,000s wasn't enough. And David being on your side wasn't enough. And he began to be insecure and worried about David being the king, which actually would go on to happen. But you see this is a small window into his character where it's misfocused on the credit he was not getting, or the credit somebody else who got something better than him. Like, that's often what's connected with pride. It's what you have, who you are, how you operate isn't enough. And there's that need to stretch for something different, or something more, and to reach further. But let's look at, so the fascinating thing about the word pride, as we look at it, at least in English, we see that it's used a little differently in the New Testament. We see a few positive examples and even a recommended way that we are supposed to use pride in a noble manner, in a wholesome manner. So let's go to that text in the book of Galatians, chapter 6. And we're going to make that this application. Let's say if we were discipling King Saul, or if we were coaching King Saul. So verse 3 and verse 4 tell us, if anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. And it says, each one should test their own actions. Test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. What does this one tell us? Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone. This is good. Taking pride in yourself alone. Without comparing themselves to someone else. This can happen online. You're comparing whatever, the likes that somebody else gets, the comments, the engagement. You can compare the money in the bank account, or the wardrobe that somebody else is wearing, or the attention somebody else gets from the women or from the fellas. You can really get into this space where it's like all of this comparison. And when I walk through life with people, I'm gonna give you another visual that I use in the personal development space, so you're able to see this up close and personal. So let me get this pulled up. Okay. So talk about this in the coaching space, but I want to make sure you all are able to grab this lesson as well. So this is what we call the 14 core life pillars. And let me see if I can pull some of this down. There we go. All right, we're able to see all of those. All right, there we go. Okay, so in any one of these, there is a possibility and a tendency for people to just really to compare yourself unnecessarily. You can compare yourself financially, you can compare yourself romantically, you can compare yourself mentally and emotionally, you compare yourself with your friends, compare your health and your fitness to somebody else's. You know, your abs to theirs, or your lack of abs to their abs, or you can compare your family to their family, your career and business to their career and business. You compare your spirituality to their spirituality. You could compare your service impact to their service impact. You could compare physical harmony to their physical. You know, you could compare the way you relax and you use your recreational time, the way you vacation to their vacation, the way they use their time management versus your time management, your virtues, your values. So anyway, you see, this is what I would say. This is all of life, right? If this is anything anybody could want categorically, 14 core life pillars, right? And so if you're aware of that, and you're aware of Galatians chapter 6, it tells us, hey, each one should test their own actions. Yeah, assess your own actions. Evaluate your own actions. Then you can take pride in yourself. This is good pride, healthy pride, helpful pride, wholesome pride. You can take pride in yourself without comparing yourself to somebody else. That's one of the reasons that, you know, not a great, I'm not one of those people that's going to be on socials, you know, looking at friends' accounts and all these things. Yeah, you know, I'll just get oddly envious, and it doesn't help me to take pride in myself, my own actions, and it doesn't help me to just not compare. So I think there's a tendency to get online, it's a comparison, right? Even as I'm streaming, you know, I look at my studio and I'm excited about what I have and what I'm doing, but there's a comparison. You know, there is that quote that there is an element of truth to it. There's that comparison can be the thief of joy, right? It can steal away the joy you have, like, and you could feel like I'm not enough because I never measure up enough, because there's always somebody better, somebody ahead, somebody smarter, somebody more educated. You know, somebody who always has something. So, all of that to say, pride can be good and helpful. And if we were coaching King Saul and we had sat down with him after he came back and after he was upset about him not getting the credit David got credit with the tens of thousands. Saul got credit for the thousands. Then I think we would have the conversation with him going, hey, like, bro, like, you're good. Like, thousands is enough. Victory is enough. You don't have to be insecure here. David is on your side. We're fighting on the same team. You know, so it's a reminder of how to take pride in ourselves without comparing ourselves. So as you're doing this self-assessment for your own life, what you'll be assessing is, am I using comparisons that are just not helpful? Are they wholesome? Are they healthy? So we have Saul. Let's go to Uzziah, which is in 2 Chronicles chapter 26. We'll see another case study on pride. And this one, we're actually going to see pride mentioned in the text. So a few of these we've looked at. We don't really see the word pride, but we see the manifestation of pride. Here in 2 Chronicles chapter 26. we're going to see like this incredible success that Uzziah had. But then we're going to see a problem. All right, it tells us in verse 3 of 2 Chronicles 26, Uzziah was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 52 years. His mother's name was Jechaliah. She was from Jerusalem. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Amaziah had done. He sought God during the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of the Lord. As long as he sought the Lord, God gave him success. Verse 6 tells us he went to war against the Philistines and broke down the walls of Gath, Jabneh, and Ashdod. He then rebuilt towns near Ashdod and elsewhere among the Philistines. God helped him against the Philistines and against the Arabs who lived in Gur-Baal and against the Meunites. The Ammonites brought tribute to Uzziah, and his fame spread as far as the border of Egypt, because he had become very powerful. He'd become powerful. Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate, at the valley gate, and at the angle of the wall, and he fortified them. He also built towers in the wilderness and dug many cisterns because he had much livestock in the foothills and in the plain. He had people work in his fields and vineyards in the hills and in the fertile lands, for he loved the soil. Uzziah had a well-trained army, ready to go up by divisions according to their numbers, as mustered by Jeiel, the secretary, and Messiah, the officer, under the direction of Hananiah, one of the royal officials. The total number of family leaders over the fighting men was 2,600. Under their command was an army of 307,500 men trained for war, a powerful force to support the king against his enemies. Uzziah provided shields, spears, helmets, coats of armor, bows, and sling stones for the entire army. In Jerusalem, he made devices invented for use on the towers and on the corner defenses so that soldiers could shoot arrows and hurl large stones from the walls. His fame spread far and wide, for he was greatly helped until he became powerful. But after Uzziah became powerful, his pride led to his downfall. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God, and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. So we get this story with Uzziah. I mean, like, accomplishments, success, achievement. You know, he was getting everything that he wanted. You know, he had the army for the war. He had the achievements. He had the workers. He had, I mean, you name it, he had it. If he wanted it, he had it, right? So you have this incredible story of the success that he had in his life. But the scripture tells us his pride led to his downfall. His pride led to his downfall, and his pride led to entitlement, where he thought he was entitled to do that which was more appropriate for the priest, not for him. And so he began to have this arrogance. You know, we kind of categorize this stuff, you know, pride, arrogance, narcissism, hubris, haughty. You know, if you're studying it in the scriptures, you know, it will be arrogance, it would be pride, it would be the haughty. Those are just three of the words you might study, especially in the Proverbs. You'll see a number of passages about these things. But so we see it in him. And here's an insight. As we looked at 4 characters already: Uzziah, Saul, Nebuchadnezzar, and Haman. One of the details you'll see that these have in common is these are all very, very successful people. They had great, if you looked at their resume and what they had achieved, they would be a cause of envy for many men as they looked at what they had accomplished. And then you see, wow, like this is their goals. So many of their goals were behind them. They had achieved what they wanted to achieve. They accomplished what they wanted to accomplish. And then there was the pride. So as we assess the pride of our hearts. There's an element of all of this. There's a great threat to us when we have some success in the journey. That's when pride can become its biggest problem. Now, let me also say that just because you don't have any success, or just because the achievements haven't gone your way, or the accomplishments aren't racked up, or your portfolio, your resume isn't all that, it doesn't mean that you're exempt from the temptation of pride. If you're on the front lines, if you're helping people, you're listening to people, you've met prideful, arrogant, haughty people from every end of the spectrum. It's not exclusively applied to the wealthy, to the rich, to the successful. No, this temptation is real for all of us. It will manifest a little bit differently. Now, so if you've had some success, you might be somebody who thinks through like, okay, well, how has this affected the way I operate, the way I process? Even I mentioned Ja Morant in the beginning, and we'll pull up an article here about Ja, and we'll get a chance to, kind of assess his situation as he had this massive struggle. And ultimately, it was him flashing a gun on an Instagram Live. And we'll read one of the articles. We'll just do CBS Sports. The algorithm favored them when I searched it right now. So we'll read this article, and we'll let him be a case study. And really, it's a cautionary tale of the pride that can get into our lives and deceive us and mislead us and lead to a whole bunch of problems that nobody wants. All right, let's take a look at it. Ja Morant's suspension. Despite being eligible to play in Monday's game against the Dallas Mavericks, the Memphis Grizzlies on Saturday said suspended star guard Ja Morant will not return to the court before Wednesday's game against the Houston Rockets. The team's coaching staff will consult with the medial staff on Morant's status for that game. Speaking to reporters on Saturday, Grizzlies head coach Taylor Jenkins said he's confident that Morant is ready to return based on conversations he's had with him. It all starts with what it's between here and what's here and here, said Jenkins as he pointed to his head, then his heart. Morant was officially suspended 8 games without pay for conduct detrimental to the league, the NBA announced on March 15th. The suspension stems from an Instagram Live video Morant posted in which he had a gun at a Denver area nightclub following a game against the Nuggets on March 3rd. The suspension included 5 games that he missed while away from the team. During that time, he spent multiple days at a counseling center in Florida. Morant met with NBA Commissioner Adam Silver on March 15th. Ja's conduct was irresponsible, reckless, and potentially very dangerous, Silver said in a statement. It also has serious consequences given his enormous following and influence. We're talking about success can be a massive opportunity for your pride to deceive you and you to make foolish decisions. It says particularly among young fans who look up to him. He has expressed sincere contrition and remorse for his behavior. Ja's also made it clear to me that he has learned from his incident and that he understands his obligations and responsibility to the Memphis Grizzlies and the broader NBA community extend well beyond his play on the court. So anyway, we get this example, and I'll search real quick how much money he's losing. So how much Ja Morant is losing with suspension. Let's see if we get some information. All right, here we go. Let's put it on screen for us. Bleacher Report's Eric Pincus reports this week that the NBA's 8-game suspension for the Memphis Grizzlies star Morant will ultimately cost him $668,639. Pincus notes that the NBA fines players 145th of their season salary for each game they are suspended. Moran is making about $12.1 million this season, which accounts for the figure that Pincus shared. So if you could imagine just going live one day, showing a gun one time, and it costing you $660,000. It's one of those moments, man. It's rough. It is rough. It's rough to grasp and process. So anyway, it's one of those things. Again, when we talk about spirituality, we talk about scriptural based lifestyle. And if I was sitting down and coaching Job Moran, I was working with him, or if I was mentoring him from a spiritual perspective and giving him some insight, before all of this happened, it would be just realizing that your success makes you a major, it brings so many temptations your way to think you got it all figured out. That, again, it's back to that Obadiah passage that says the pride of your heart has deceived you. So that pride that happens on the inside because of the success that's happened on the outside. And when we begin to process that pride, what it can do is lead us dramatically off track. And we see $660,000 that he's losing just because of putting up that gun on one Instagram live. That's crazy stuff right there. All right, let's do another case study with Jenna Ortega. We don't see the resolution of this story we're about to look at, but I think it's relevant for our discussion about pride. And we'll see the way this whole thing ages. And let me go to Jenna Ortega News. The New York Post. And by the way, I have no idea which websites are associated with which camp or whatever. So either way, I'll Google it, and then whatever they show me is what I'll show here. So here we go. This one is a lot of stuff there. All right, there we go. Wednesday star Jenna Ortega's rude comments should kill her career, but they won't. What makes Jenna Ortega think she can publicly trash her employer and get away with it? Dang. Everybody and everything, that's what. Such is the punishment-free cowering in terror. You do you, be well in the world we live in. And I'm not really interested in this writer's perspective as much as I'm interested in her own description of how she carried herself on the set of Wednesday. So she says it herself. So that's what I'm most interested in, not so much this perspective of this writer. But let's see if we get to it. On the podcast, the actress, who's also in Scream 6, discussed how, like an authoritarian dictator, she was a self-appointed script doctor on Wednesday, and that she deserves the utmost thanks from the actual paid unionized writers for bettering their thoughtless schlock. Again, we're still reading the opinion. Let's go now. We're going to go to the actual text of what she said and how she described the events on Wednesday. So here's what it said. There were times on that set where I even became almost unprofessional, in a sense, where I just started changing lines. Ortega said, proudly citing the sort of actions that would get anybody else in any other profession fired. Writer is not holding back. But okay, let's let her continue to explain it. So she was changing lines. Again, that's not her role. Her role as an actor is not to change the lines. Again, she wasn't producer, although she will be producer of season 2, I've heard. It says, the script supervisor, I thought I was going with something, and then I had to sit down with the writers, and they'd be like, wait, what happened to the scene? And I'd have to go and explain why I couldn't do certain things. For example, being in the love triangle, it made no sense. There was a line about a dress she has to wear for a school dance, and she says, oh my God, I love it. I can't believe I said that. I literally hate myself. I had to go, no. Let me see if she says anything else here. So ultimately, the reason I was bringing up this one is because there's a spirit about many of us experience in our own youth and our own past when we've had some success, and there's an attitude. I remember having this attitude where it's you're young and you're always right, never doubt, but often wrong. Again, I'll say it again. Always right, never doubt, but often wrong. So again, we're going to see how this ages and how this impacts her career, how this impacts her with her again, the sets that she's on. I think whenever I want people to be successful, but when you begin against some of the way that pride can manifest is you don't listen to other people who have credentials, who have experience, who have expertise that you do not have. And so she kind of self-appointed her role into having an authority that she really didn't have. And she even describes that it was kind of unprofessional, the way she carried herself. But we're going to see the way it unfolds as far as the way her career and the opportunities that do or don't come to her and the reputation that she builds. I think anybody could come back from this. It seems like it'd be a minor blip in her journey. But if this continues and she insists on having authority that she does not yet have in roles where this becomes more sensitive and more, again, particular, then I could see how that could become a problem. So all of that to say, there's a few proverbs I want to give us as we wrap this up, because I'm curious, Jenna, or say like in 10 years, if she's going to reflect and go, you know what, I would have done that differently. I wish I could see her going, I wish maybe I could have had more respect for my peers, or even if she had acted that way, but she went on a podcast to talk about it. That's where it could become an issue of, is that the best thing to do? To go on the podcast and talk about your insubordination, you giving yourself authority to change lines that you weren't in charge of. But she not only did it, but then she talked about it. That's where it becomes problematic. So it's not a great look for somebody. So as we wind this down, I'll give you a few proverbs to think about as you're assessing the pride in your heart and how it might be affecting your words, your thoughts, your deeds, your responses, and even your deeper beliefs. We have Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12 and 16:25 says, there is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death. That's one of those proverbs that's in two places, 14:12 and 16:25. Also tells us, Proverbs 12, verse 15, the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. So I think I'm going to end on a more positive note. This actually comes from my book on speaking. So I'm going to read it from the first chapter. And I suppose we'll use a more uplifting example as we wrap this up. And it's about Giannis Antetokounmpo. And what I wrote in this chapter is, on the evening of July 20th, 2021, Giannis Antetokounmpo became an NBA champion and the NBA Finals most valuable player. Witnessing this conquest, I recall 2 moments earlier in 2021 when Giannis deferred to LeBron James as the best player in the world in March of 2021. And Kevin Durant as the best player in the world in June of 2021. Both of these statements came after he won 2 regular season most valuable player awards and the Defensive Player of the Year award. And I go on to talk about the contrast between him and LeBron and how Giannis deferred to other people, even as a professional, even with the accolades, even with the awards. And he passed off the greatness, even the greatest player, to other people. And he was even the champion next year. It reminded me, again, back to those who exalt themselves will be humbled. But those who humbled themselves will be exalted. You guys have a great night, and we'll see you on tomorrow's video. Peace.